I don't think it's working. Thank you, Ian. Okay, what I'd like to do, obviously we've got a bit of time now for discussion and contributions. If I can take them in bunches of 3 and ask the panel to answer them, I think that's the best way of doing it. So, I've got one at the back there, yes.
Right, mine is not a question, but it's a horrible observation. I'm Carol, I'm a member of the RMT, and some of you might know that we were on strike. One of the people on the picket lines told me that he went to a picket line at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he saw some people in their 70s, he reckoned, all lining up, watching. They went and had some breakfast, and they had and they were standing there. So one of them went up to him and said, "Excuse me, when does this food bank open?" It's for all the pickets, you know, eating before staying on the picket line. And they thought that the people on the picket line were part of a food bank. So anyway, the pickets gave them food and everything else. And they all gave 10p because they didn't want to something for nothing. And one of the pickets said, "Do you want some to take away, you know, for later on?" And they said, "Yes, please," and they gave another 10p. And these were all people about 70 years old. They saw this food and they just presumed it was a food bank. I mean...
Right, thank you.
Isn't that terrible?
Yeah. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, Michael from Red Pepper magazine. Murad, I think, mentioned the boss of Centrica, British Gas, the CEO. That I was watching him on TV just before it came out. They've made other hundreds of millions of profits again. And he was saying that because of the instability and the uncertainty that has been created by the fact that politicians have now even started talking about the extent of the profits that were being made and their uncompetitive sort of massive share of the market. The fact that people were even talking about that was creating instability and uncertainty, and therefore, ultimately the lights could go out because there wouldn't be capitalists wouldn't invest in the industry. And that's just such an extraordinary way of blackmailing the public, really. Given that British Gas was, formerly a public asset, and now he's talking about, if they can't get their way completely all the way along the line, we're now going to have the lights turned out. And I give a measure of credit to Ed Miliband in the energy price freeze was at least a recognition of trying to take some form of action. The 2-year energy price freeze, I don't think goes anywhere near far enough. I mean, there are clearly issues there. I mean, they could preempt the price freeze with by front-loading increases. They could sort of cut investment levels during the period of that 2-year price freeze. So there are issues with that. I think the key point was that the speaker from Fuel Policy Action made was that we really need to tackle the question of ownership. That, it's not, we're talking about resetting the market, but the fact it shouldn't be a market for private interest and profit. It should be a public utility. It should be running the interests of the people. So I think that's what, that's where I think that there would be, significantly more public support behind an attempt to bring energy back under public ownership ultimately. Which I don't think you can just expect politicians, appeal to their better nature or goodwill, or I mean, without wanting to denigrate the efforts of people that are drawing up petitions and making, drawing up, trying to raise public consciousness in that way. But I think it needs more. We do need to directly resist some of these proposals. So I think that what happened in Derby was a tremendously inspiring example of direct community resistance to corporate interests, and I think that we will see more of that. I think, as Barton Moss is showing, there will be more examples. I think it will be critical, not just to wait for a kind of enlightened government to start introducing reforms, although that is necessary. We also need to take what action we can to directly confront these interests and make a real difference ourselves.
Thank you. One more. Yes, David.
The thing is, talking about housing and everything else. One thing that would be quite cheap for the government is to suggest that any new building from next year, say, that's going to be built with a flat roof. Flat roofs are supposed to be waterproof, although they're not always. If it has an upstand, then water tanks could collect the rain and use it for the toilets, could be built in, into the flats, whatever it is. And rainwater capture also into the sump, perhaps if they need it for later on. And the other thing is any building that's going to have a tiled roof, you don't need roof tiles. You can get solar ones that's all you put on. You don't need to put tiles and then put big things on top, big frames. And so the houses look nicer because they've just got a tiled roof. There's no other silly things on it. And they all connect up and give you a lot of electricity. And if that came into the building regulations, then all the new houses will be better. They're worried about insulation, making the wall thicker. But some of the people are thicker and don't think about, the top thing.
Right, thank you. Davis from a residents association.
They don't give you a lot of electricity.
Sorry, go for the chair.
Chair, can I say something?
Yeah, well, I'll let you have the question because Carol's wasn't really a question. Yeah.
It's more of a few observations on the panel and the speakers.
If we just wait, we'll do that in the next round because then we can. Anyone want to come back on what's been said by Michael about nationalisation of yeah?
Yeah, Michael. Look, I'm not avoiding that issue. I just think in the present context, we've kind of got to do it incrementally. Like I said, I wish there were measures right now that could deal with it rather than wait for an electoral mandate. And oddly enough, I found John Major's proposal when that discussion, just before the autumn statement was made, quite an interesting one. I thought, John Major with his politics, his background, Lambeth councillor, Lambeth working class lad, etc. He could see how important that issue was and that the Tories needed to respond. And his notion was a one-off tax on the earnings of the private utilities. And yes, we shouldn't forget that historically, British Gas and also Thames Water were public monopolies. And now what's happening to the surpluses is it's going to shareholders of those companies. The one where I've had a bit of success is, and that's only because actually Ofwat, to its credit, did have the balls to take them on. Because of the market regulations that we've got, we are dependent on the regulators doing their bit. But in the case of Thames Water, they were proposing next financial year, 2014-15, to up all our water bills by £29 each, which would have been a much bigger increase than anything the energy companies were proposing. And they are effectively a private monopoly. Any of us around here or in central London have got nowhere else to go to for our water supplies. Thankfully, in that case, Ofwat didn't back down when committees like the Environment Committee at the London Assembly put up the case that there was no grounds for this £29 increase. And subsequently, when we were told that utility bills were a major issue for Londoners, I think we've got that one right.
So can you speak up a bit? I can see some people can't quite hear it.
Sorry. So I think we've had one success there. I think we've got to use what processes we have already to challenge the cartels and the monopolies that we've got in these market structures. In the long run, I look forward to seeing in the rail system we've got nationally when the franchises end to be brought in house, quite honestly, because we've seen on the East Coast contracts like that can be run much better than what we're being told.
Okay.
And hopefully let's see the pendulum swing on that front. I'll run to the other issues.
Okay. Anybody else?
I agree with you about the renationalisation of the public utilities. And the sort of threatening, blackmailing tactics that are being used at this moment in time. The lights are going to go off, the lights are going to go off, unless you're willing to pay through the nose for your energy so that you can line our big profits and that we've become accustomed to. But I think there's another issue as well in terms of renationalisation of public utilities, which is about energy production, because it's clear that those kind of vested interest around the oil, coal and gas industry, they're not going to budge. and many of the elites, the governments, the politicians are too much in bed with those fossil fuel companies and the subsidies that you mentioned before. And so therefore I think we are going to talk about renewable energy in any kind of meaningful sense. I can't see it meaningfully happen as a sort of consequence of the growing market space for the renewable energy. It's not going to happen unless we're some kind of public control over energy production, and therefore it's able to reflect the public will that we do want. And that's what the figures tell us, by the way. The polls tell us that the majority of people, well up to the 60s and 70%, want to see clean renewable energy. They don't want us wedded to fossil fuels. But I know people saw an article by John Harris this week, sort of touches on the final thing that you said. John Harris, I think, right in the Guardian. It was a very good article. And at the end of it, he made the comment, which is something I very strongly agree with. He made it in a negative way, and I'd like to put it in a positive way. He said, but I don't understand, he said, why we haven't seen people take to the streets on this issue, around the question of climate change, around the question of flooding. I mean, there's no doubt about it, there's been a post-Copenhagen lull, depression, you name it, call it what you will. We've got to break it. We've got to get out of that way of thinking now. We're not in that situation anymore, and we've got to take back to the streets. As far as I'm concerned, we have to take back to the streets in significant numbers, because I think the environmental movement is very dispersed. There's lots of stuff happening, but it never looks like it's very big. And it is big, and not only is it big, it'll get bigger the more visible it is, the more that gives a sort of sense of confidence. You're not on your own if you think these things, if you say these things, if you argue with your workmates about it. I mean, next year is a really important year, I think. I know we're at the beginning of 2014, but 2015 is an important year. We've got a general election coming up, and we've got the COP talks in Paris. It's the next round on our doorstep, and therefore, campaigning against climate change is talking about a national demonstration beginning of 2015, leading into the general election, and then through into the COP talks. I hope we're able to pull it off. I really hope other groups are willing to sort of come on board and support it and whatever. But really, I think we're not going to break this lockdown until we are back on the streets in sizable numbers.
Do either of you want to come in, because we move on to other questions?
On a couple of things.
No, we're still answering the first round.
The nationalisation. People are doing other things besides.
Only one chair, thank you.
Besides nationalisation, people are actually trying to get local community-controlled energy supplies. They've been having some progress on that in Germany, particularly Hamburg. And there's energy cooperatives set up here as well. They are kind of strangled in the cot as much as they can by the big companies and the ownership of the grid. But in Hamburg, they're buying the grid, and other German cities are working on the same thing. So there are possibilities other than nationalisation, which doesn't appeal to everybody because, the nationalised industries were also very heavy-handed. They're better than the private ones, but something that people can control themselves is a lot more attractive in a lot of ways. Secondly, in terms of the back on the streets, I absolutely agree, but I think the most critical thing at this point is we need a win on fracking. We have to stop that, and I think the climate movement will be a lot stronger if we actually succeed in getting the message across that we don't want something that's going to destroy the local environment, destroy the climate, and not put bills down when they say it will put bills down. I think we'll be a long way forward. And another thing I think that is going to happen is that people who've been subject to the floods are going to have to get up together and rise up together. And that, it hasn't happened yet, but it's something that people who are interested in organising on the environment might really usefully look to helping facilitate, inviting speakers and giving people a voice.
Is it? Okay. Would you like to come in? You said you had lots to say. Can you try and tell us a couple of things?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd say that we shouldn't oversimplify the issue of climate change, which I think is what's happening here. Climate change is a natural phenomenon that's been going on for millions of years, and humans have adapted to it while they've been alive on the planet. The difference now is that we're forcing the climate to change at an accelerated pace, aka global warming. This is the issue, and I think it's misinformation to say that we should all be frightened of climate change, because even though climate change is the big picture, the real issue is the fact that the pollution we put in the atmosphere is forcing it to change at a pace that we can't adapt to. That's the first point. The second point puts sustainability at the centre of the matter, because it's not only climate change that's the problem, we're killing off the food chain by reducing biodiversity at a rate that's never been seen before. And that's not even been mentioned tonight, and yet it's probably more likely to threaten our existence than climate change will do in the next 50 years, because the food chain might collapse. Plus lots of other issues, associated with sustainability. So that should be the focus, I think, personally.
Let's give people a chance to come back on that then. Yeah. Next question. Yeah.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I'm taking through. Set it through.
It doesn't have to be a question, it can be a contribution.
Yes, well, they have been so far, haven't they? Okay, contributions, yeah. Okay. But we'll give everyone a chance to come back, yeah?
No, it's just that I think we should be a little bit more optimistic about what can actually be done. For instance, when Carol talked about the strike of RMT over the tubes, of course it was about saving jobs, it was about defending the conditions that they got, but the result of that fight means that they actually have maintained the degree to which they've been successful, and one keeps their fingers crossed that it's going to be successful, to save those jobs means that we still have a railway system. And the railway system is, of course, a contribution to actually maintaining the environment. And what I'm saying here is that wherever workers come together to actually defend their conditions, actually, for instance, example, let's take teaching. Teachers at the moment are engaged in the struggle to defend their pension and raise their wages, but they're also arguing about defending education. And more and more, when you look at the situation generally, when workers are forced to fight, when trade unions are forced to fight to actually protect their conditions, you also find that the degree to which they're successful, they also defend things which are decent and proper. If we could get health workers and the supporters of health workers to defend the health system, that is a wonderful contribution to defending the environmental standards. And so the thing goes on, and it is really quite incredible, isn't it, when you think about it, that the privatisation of the energy system, introduced by the Tories and also supported by Labour, was to actually allow private enterprise to come in because they're more efficient. And that comes in to take over the electricity energy companies are the two biggest nationalised corporations, one German and the other one French. So in order to actually to have privatisation, actually you have two nationalised companies running it. So you actually have people in Britain who are actually subsidising the consumers in France and Germany. A complete and utter madness. And it's those sorts of things that we need to actually fight against. And really, when you look around, who's actually going to do it? It's only those sections of people who are actually organised in trade unions that can begin to get that sort of lead.
Okay.
I want to pick up some of the points made by contributors, colleagues, on climate change and whether we're oversimplifying climate change and indeed whether they're not addressing more directly biodiversity. I mean, I don't want to sound a politician between maintaining biodiversity and opposing climate change because the things are clearly interconnected. But I think, it's quite wrong to suggest that what's been argued here tonight, was argued by climate scientists, it's more than 95% of climate scientists, it's 99% of climate scientists, is oversimplifying the situation. The things that happen...
I said that they wouldn't. I said the panel was oversimplifying the situation.
Okay,
not the climate scientists.
Well, what's being said here is essentially what the climate scientists...
No, it isn't. That's my point. That's
okay.
where I
think
being a climate scientist myself,
okay.
I object to that because I'm hearing people talk about climate change like it was Lego. It isn't. It's far more complicated than that, just like energy is. It's far more complicated, and I think it's misinformation to treat it in a superficial manner.
Well,
that's
I'm
what
not
I think
sure.
is happening here.
I'm not sure what we're treating in this manner. Clearly this is a public meeting, it's not
okay, so let's get down to detail.
Chair.
Let's get down to detail.
Detail.
Just finish again.
I can start.
Okay, all right. I just want to give as many people a chance as possible.
I mean, I don't know what climate science that you're involved in, but I've listened to most of the leading English-speaking climate scientists over the last 4 or 5 years, and we're moving to a position where we're not talking about complex modelling, we're actually talking about data. Peter Wadham at Cambridge, the ocean scientist, goes under the Arctic and measures the Arctic and says how much it's diminishing.
So my point was...
Oh, hang on.
My point was very
Let him
simple.
finish.
No, he's not talking about...
Let him finish.
Just a
Shut
moment.
up and let him finish.
Can you let Ken finish? Because
I was not disagreeing with this. I'm going to save you a lot of breath. All I was saying was climate change, yes, but
Look, we want to issue.
acceleration of climate change is the issue, not the fact we have climate change. No one's disagreeing with
I
that.
think we all know
can we
that.
just
No, we don't.
Martin, I've been derailed here.
yeah, please carry on.
I think many of the climate scientists have been taken by surprise about how rapidly things are happening. What's happening to the jet stream, the situation with droughts in the US, the temperatures in Australia, and so on. Now, they're not going to, they're not going to have every one of these extreme weather events to be directly related to climate change, but it's extremely likely because it fits all the predictions over the last 10 years, and we have to work on the precautionary principle. And we are it's not just climate scientists talking about the possibility by the end of the century it will be 4 to 6 degrees, well before 6 degrees hotter than pre-industrial conditions. Big organisations, big capitalist organisations like the International Energy Agency are saying this. Now, if you're looking at the flood, we're at about 0.85 of a degree warmer than pre-industrial conditions at the moment, and we're seeing what the impact is in terms of floods, wind, and so on, and all the other things around. Can we imagine what it's going to be like between 4.5 and 6 degrees? It's already affecting biodiversity. At 6 degrees, 9% of the world species would be extinct, I'm told. So these things, I think it's a debating point. So we're oversimplifying and climate change happens naturally. Yes, of course, we know it does. But we're facing a situation, a drastic situation, with human-induced climate change, which is accelerating at a pace which gives us very little time to deal with it. We don't know what the window of opportunity is. It might be 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it may be over already. But it's got to be tackled. Now, I did want to pick up some of the other points that are being made, but I think our crucial argument is this cannot be left to the market, which is what the present government is doing. We cannot say, we want to save the world, but only if somebody can make a profit from it. There really has to be direct government action. We have to fight for it on many different fronts, and we have to mobilise people around those things that chiefly concern them. Mobilise people over fuel poverty, mobilise people over jobs. There's, 2.5 million people unemployed, many people on short-term contract, many people on zero-hour contract. We're saying we can tackle climate change, easily meet the targets of 80% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and create 1 million jobs through government intervention. And there has to be government intervention on many fronts. The 1 Million Climate Jobs campaign argues that we need a national climate service so we can properly plan and properly redeploy people in tackling climate change. But we also have to mobilise people around the other areas to bring our services back under democratic control. The majority of people are in favour of renationalising the railways. We need democratic control of the railways if we're going to have a climate policy. Can't just leave it to profiteering. We have to have democratic control of the energy companies. I disagree with Ruth. Yes, we're in favour of local energy generation, but we've got to tackle the commanding heights of the economy. And if we can mobilise people to force the renationalisation of public utilities, they're not going to sit back and allow it just